Hi everyone. First off, I'd like to acknowledge that no matter where we are in the country today, we stand upon the lands of our First Nations people. This country, this land, was never ceded, it was taken. And it is high time that as a country we recognise that in total, and that we initiated a treaty ratified in our Constitution and began to make restitution in real ways with our First Nations people. I welcome you all to this particular section of the wonderful Adelaide Vegan Festival. And I must apologise because I can't be there in person today. I would absolutely love to. It is my most favourite of events on the calendar every year, and I have the best time when I'm there. But unfortunately, COVID restrictions prevent me from being there. So the next best thing, here I am. And I'd like to talk to you today about a very pertinent subject. A subject that we need to recognise the links between its two aspects. Because in order to have the best change for animals, in order to enact change for animals that enriches their lives and recognises them for the beings that they are, for their own interests and not for ours, the relationship between these two subjects needs to be recognised and needs to be dealt with. Now those two things are activism and politics. And they are the perfect marriage. They are the perfect partnership. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. This has been going on since time immemorial, since the beginning of democracy. A subject, a problem in the community was identified. There might have been lawmakers who weren't necessarily aware of the problem, but members of their communities took that problem to them, explained what the problem was, and asked for their help. Now, if they didn't get that help, they would then go back out into their communities and gain widespread support, and then take that support back to those lawmakers and prove that there was a reason for change. Lawmakers, members of Parliament, call them what you will, have always been ones to sniff the wind of change. And as a result, they would usually listen to these concerns then, because they realise at the end of the day they only stay in those roles if they listen to what's being said. So then they change those laws. We've seen prime examples of that across the globe for many, many years in human rights. All we're doing is extending that through to the rights of non-human animals. And there are prime examples of how this marriage, this partnership works within the non-human animal sector. We saw the action and the advocacy that Sea Shepherd have undertaken for many years in the Antarctic to try and get rid of Japanese whaling, which ultimately ended up with a decision in the World Court taken there by Australia to end that. We, as Animal Justice Party MPs, are very conscious of that partnership, and it informs every single thing that we do. Mark Pearson and Emma Hurst, my colleagues in New South Wales, and I myself in Victoria, we are all driven by that knowledge of that partnership and how it has to work. We have been activists ourselves. We've been out on the ground. We've gotten our hands dirty. It's where we come from. In fact, it's the reason why we are able to advocate and to push so plainly for the rights of these animals in the parliaments that we represent. It's because we understand the issues better than most, certainly better than career politicians who might have come up through an office and an internship, etc. Our political movement is born of animal activism. It can't be separated. Now, there's certainly examples of where activism and community activism has driven political change. And let me be clear here. The end result of all activism is to drive change. That change must occur at the legislative level. Otherwise, the problem will continue to exist. The problems are only gotten rid of through legislative or regulatory change enacted by a legislative body. Once we realise that, we can then tune our activism in such a way that it informs political debate and political change. We've seen that occur. We're seeing it occur with my colleagues in New South Wales, where they're driving this change in amongst the local councils in their areas, where they're getting rid of the sale of fur, one of the most contentious and horrid of the industries that exploit animals that we know of in the world. Absolutely horrid. We're about to see it in Victoria, where I introduced a private member's bill to change the way in which wildlife is treated, the way wildlife are dealt with during emergency and non-emergency situations, by attempting to remove through a legislative process the control of the rescue, the care and the release of all wildlife in emergency situations and non-emergency situations away from the department that controls it, because it has a contradiction. The same department that is in charge of saving wildlife is the same one that issues permits to kill them. That can't continue to exist. But that change is being driven by the sector itself. The fires that we had just recently, where it's estimated over 3 billion animals were killed, produced public outrage at the fact that after firegrounds were declared safe, rescuers, vets, darters, etc. were denied entry by a panicked department, and consequently many, many animals died that shouldn't have. That outrage was reflected all around the world and resulted in advocacy from people who'd never become involved in that sort of thing before. And I've just become the vehicle for that change, because it has to occur legislatively, and that will happen. In what form remains to be seen. That's something we're still discussing. But another example of that is, for years, many people in Victoria have been complaining about convenience killing in pounds and shelters. And I know that this is a problem in every other state as well, but I can only speak to the Victorian experience. This has been a matter of much distress for those who rescue these animals. And we're talking here about healthy animals that could live happy and healthy lives away from a pound and shelter, who are killed because they exhibit symptoms of anxiety, for instance. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'd been taken from my familiar environment and placed inside a cage with a number of other animals surrounding me, all in high states of anxiety and vocalising, I'd be anxious too. In those situations, those animals are usually killed. Later this month, I'll be using one of my speaking spots to bring forward reform in the pounds and shelter area that will stop this happening. But it'll go much further than that. It will deal with issues of desexing. It will deal with issues of free living animals in our communities. All of which has been driven by activism. That perfect partnership. There are many, many organisations, wonderful organisations, that carry out this, that can be beacons for any of you who want to be involved at that level. I've mentioned Sea Shepherd, the Farm Transparency Project. There are many of them in your state. A quick Google search or a Facebook search will show you who they are and who you can get involved with, and I encourage you to do so. Because as I say, I'm only here because of animal advocacy. We can only enact change because Mark and Emma and I can be the voices of you speaking on behalf of those non-human animals. And we have to keep those two things aligned. Because on some subjects and some issues, no matter how much the community complains, some politicians, some governments will just refuse to listen because they don't have a champion for those issues within their own ranks. It's not important to them. They don't see that it could be the thing that gets them re-elected, increases their popularity, but even more than that, it shows their community that they are people who actually care, who have morals, who aren't in it for their own gain. I am very proud to be a member of a party that understands this relationship. And again, it's a party that was built on the foundation of animal advocacy and will continue to be so. I know that in South Australia, for instance, you've come perilously close so many times to having members of Parliament, and I'm extremely confident that you're not far away. If you're a South Australian and you're thinking about getting involved in animal advocacy, I'll quote an old football coach from here in Victoria. Don't think, do. Just go ahead and do it. My wonderful wife April, and this is the reason why I tell you why you should just do it. And I also say that if you're considering moving into becoming involved in a more political way, don't think, do. And my wife April, as I say, says it better than anybody else. Every single one of us here is so concerned about the issues that affect the lives of non-human animals, and we want to do something about it. But often our own fears hold us back. Perhaps the way to get around that is to think of this. If you were in their position, what would you want someone to do to speak on your behalf? You would want someone to speak as an advocate for you. You would want a politician to change the laws to protect your life. And that is the be-all and end-all. That is, as they say, the end of the day. Their lives are important, and it's our job as animal advocates, all of us, to make sure that we use that perfect partnership to save their lives. Cheers.